I pulled into my driveway in Woodland Ridge Landing at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, with ice already forming on my windshield, and a repair ticket that had to be closed by noon or my regional manager was going to bury me in paperwork. I am a regional field technician for a telecom contractor, which means I spend half my life driving between job sites in Northern Virginia and the other half troubleshooting equipment that should have been replaced 5 years ago. I moved to Fairfax 6 months earlier because the rent was reasonable, and the commute to my coverage zone was under 40 minutes. What I did not know was that Woodland Ridge Landing Association, the HOA that ran this older planned neighborhood, had a board full of retired people with nothing better to do than enforce rules that changed, depending on who you annoyed that week. The neighborhood had been around since the early 90s, and you could tell. The streets were narrow, the landscaping was overgrown in some spots and obsessively manicured in others, and every third house had a different interpretation of what color shutters were allowed. The board had been locked in a power struggle for years, with factions that went back to arguments about mailbox placement in 2006. I learned all of this later. That morning, all I knew was that I had a busted fiber node to replace before the weather turned worse, and I needed to grab my tool bag and get moving. I stepped out of my truck, popped the rear hatch, and pulled out a folding chair I kept for job sites where I had to sit and monitor equipment. My boots were caked with slush from the last location, so I set the chair on my front porch, sat down, and started unlacing. The porch was covered, and I figured it would take me 30 seconds to get my boots off, swap into house shoes, grab my bag, and leave. I did not even look up until I heard the crunch of footsteps on my walkway. A woman in a burgundy parka and a teal knit beanie was standing at the base of my porch steps with a clipboard in one hand and a keyring in the other. She had a short gray bob and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. She jingled the keyring, and I saw at least 4 gate fobs hanging from it. She said, "Good morning. I am Nicole Harwood, Landscaping Committee Lead for Woodland Ridge Landing Association. I need to inform you that you are in violation of community standards." I blinked at her. I said, "Violation of what?" She gestured at the folding chair. "Outdoor furniture must be stored when not in use. You cannot leave clutter on your porch. It is in the covenant, Section 12, subsection 4. I looked at the chair. It was a plain black folding chair, the kind you can buy at any hardware store. I said, "I am sitting in it right now. I am using it." She shook her head. "The rule states that furniture must be appropriate for its location. A folding chair is not appropriate porch furniture. You need a porch set that matches the aesthetic standards outlined in the architectural guidelines." I felt my jaw tighten. I said, "I am taking off my boots. I will be gone in 2 minutes." She wrote something on her clipboard. She said, "I am just doing my job. Do not blame me. You will receive a formal notice by the end of the day. If you do not comply within 48 hours, the association will assess a $50 fine per day until the violation is corrected." I stood up. I said, "You are going to fine me $50 a day because I sat down on my own porch." She jingled the keyring again. She said, "The rules apply to everyone. I suggest you read the covenant packet. It is available on the association website." She turned and walked back toward the street, and I saw her pull out her phone and take a photo of my porch from the sidewalk. I grabbed my tool bag, locked the door, and drove to the job site. The whole way there, I kept replaying the conversation in my head. I had read the covenant packet when I signed my lease, and I did not remember anything about folding chairs. I pulled over at a gas station, opened the PDF on my phone, and scrolled through Section 12. It mentioned outdoor furniture, but the language was vague. It said furniture must be in good repair and consistent with neighborhood aesthetics. There was no list of banned items. There was no definition of what consistent meant. I took a screenshot and kept driving. The repair took 3 hours. The node was older than my truck, and I had to splice in a new fiber line by hand because the conduit was full of ice. By the time I finished, my fingers were numb, and my phone had 6 missed calls. 3 were from my manager. 2 were from the HOA management company. 1 was from a number I did not recognize. I called the management company first. A woman answered and said, "Woodland Ridge Landing Association. This is Karen speaking." I said, "This is not about the landscaping committee, is it?" She paused. She said, Are you the resident at 4217 Maple Grove Court? I said, yes. She said, we received a report that you have unauthorized guests parking in visitor spaces. Your lease allows one assigned space. Any additional vehicles must be registered with the office, and overnight guest parking requires a 48-hour advance request. I said, I do not have any guests. I live alone. She said, the landscaping committee reported 2 vehicles in visitor spaces near your unit this morning. I felt my chest tighten. I said, I park in my driveway. I do not use visitor spaces. She said, the committee has photos. I can email them to you. If the vehicles are not moved by 5 p.m. today, they will be cited. If they are still there tomorrow, they will be towed. I said, send me the photos. She said she would and hung up. 2 minutes later, I had an email with 3 attachments. The photos showed the visitor parking area near my building. There were 2 cars in the spaces, both covered in snow. One was a silver sedan. One was a red hatchback. Neither of them was mine. I zoomed in on the license plates, but the snow was too thick to read them. I forwarded the email to myself and called the management company back. This time, a man answered. I explained the situation. He said the committee had the authority to issue citations, and if I wanted to dispute them, I needed to submit a written appeal within 10 business days. I asked if the committee had checked the vehicle registrations before issuing the report. He said that was not his department. I asked who owned the cars in the photos. He said he could not share that information. I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my truck and stared at the photos. The visitor spaces were 100 feet from my front door. I had walked past them that morning and had not paid attention. I pulled up Google Maps and confirmed the layout. The spaces were shared by 4 buildings, which meant at least 40 units. Anyone in those units could have parked there. I took another screenshot and saved it to a folder I labeled HOA evidence. I spent the rest of the afternoon finishing 2 more tickets and checking my phone every 10 minutes. By 4 p.m., I was back in my neighborhood. I drove past the visitor spaces. The 2 cars were gone. I parked in my driveway, grabbed my bag, and walked to my front door. There was a yellow envelope taped to it. Inside was a printed notice on Woodland Ridge Landing Association letterhead. It stated that I was in violation of Covenant Section 12, Subsection 4, regarding outdoor furniture. It stated that I had 48 hours to remove the offending item or face a $50 daily fine. It was signed by Nicole Harwood, Landscaping Committee Lead. At the bottom, in handwritten ink, she had added, I will make sure every neighbor knows what you did. I read the line 3 times. I folded the notice, took a photo of it, and added it to my evidence folder. Then I went inside, made coffee, and started researching Virginia HOA law. By midnight, I had a decent understanding of the situation. HOAs in Virginia have broad authority to enforce covenants, but they have to follow their own rules. They cannot change the interpretation of a rule mid-enforcement. They cannot selectively enforce rules against specific residents. They cannot assess fines without proper notice and a hearing process. I printed out the relevant statutes, highlighted the key sections, and added them to a binder I started keeping on my kitchen counter. The next morning, I woke up to 3 inches of new snow and a text from my manager. He said the plow contractor only had 1 service window that afternoon, and if I missed it, I would be snowed in until morning. I had 2 tickets left in my queue, both time-sensitive. I texted back that I would handle it and started loading my truck. I was halfway down my walkway when I saw Nicole Harwood standing next to my mailbox. She had the same clipboard. She had the same key ring. She jingled it and said, Good morning. I need to inform you that your compliance period expired at midnight. You are now accruing fines at $50 per day. I stopped walking. I said, the notice said I had 48 hours. I received it yesterday afternoon. That means I have until this afternoon. She shook her head. She said, the violation was documented yesterday morning. The 48-hour period began at that time. I am just doing my job, do not blame me. I felt my hands tighten on my tool bag. I said, that is not how notice periods work. You cannot backdate the compliance window. She made a note on her clipboard. She said, The board has the authority to interpret the covenant. If you disagree, you can file an appeal. The next board meeting is in 3 weeks. I said, 3 weeks. She said, yes. Meetings are scheduled quarterly. If you miss the next one, you will have to wait until May. She turned to leave, then stopped and looked back. She said, oh, and I forwarded your information to code enforcement. They will be inspecting your property tomorrow. I believe there may be unpermitted modifications to your porch railing. She walked away before I could respond. I stood there for 10 seconds, watching her cross the parking lot. Then I pulled out my phone and called the city code enforcement office. I explained that I was a tenant, not the owner, and that I had not made any modifications to the property. The person on the phone said they had not received any complaints yet, but if they did, an inspector would contact me within 5 business days. I thanked them and hung up. I drove to my first job site and tried to focus. The ticket was a simple node swap, and I finished it in under an hour. The second ticket was more complicated. The customer had intermittent signal loss, and I had to trace the line back to the junction box to find a corroded splice. By the time I finished, it was 2 p.m. and the snow was starting again. I called my manager and told him I was done. He said the plow contractor would be at my complex at 4 p.m. and I needed to move my truck to the street or it would get blocked in. I drove back to Woodland Ridge Landing and parked on the street in front of my building. I walked to my unit and saw another yellow envelope on my door. This one was thicker. Inside was a packet of documents. The first page was a notice of intent to file a lien. It stated that I owed the HOA $200 in fines, plus a $75 administrative fee, plus interest accruing at 18% annually. The second page was a ledger showing 4 days of fines at $50 each. The dates were wrong. The first fine was dated 3 days before I received the original notice. I took photos of every page and added them to my evidence folder. Then I sat on my couch and called the management company again. This time, I got voicemail. I left a message explaining that the ledger was incorrect and that I wanted copies of all violation reports filed against my address. I said I was documenting everything and that I would be filing a formal complaint if the charges were not dropped. I hung up and stared at my phone. I knew I was being targeted. I knew the charges were bogus. What I did not know was why. I had been in the neighborhood for 6 months. I kept to myself. I paid my rent on time. I did not park in visitor spaces. I did not play loud music. I did not have parties. The only thing I had done was sit on my porch in a folding chair. I opened my laptop and started searching for information about Nicole Harwood. It took me 20 minutes to find her name in the HOA meeting minutes archived on the association website. She had been on the landscaping committee for 8 years. She had filed over 300 violation reports in that time. She had been reprimanded twice by the board for overreach, but both reprimands were later rescinded. I kept digging and found a post on a neighborhood Facebook group from 2 years earlier. A former resident had written a long complaint about Nicole harassing them over a potted plant on their balcony. The thread had 40 comments, most of them from people sharing similar stories. One comment mentioned that Nicole had pressured several owners to sell after she made their lives miserable with endless violations. I screenshotted the entire thread and added it to my evidence folder. Then I looked up property records for my building. My unit was owned by a man named Ed Kellerman who lived in Richmond. I found his contact information through the county assessor website and sent him an email explaining what was happening. I attached copies of the violation notices and the bogus ledger. I said I thought the HOA was trying to pressure him into selling. I did not expect a response, but 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Ed said, "I have been dealing with this garbage for 3 years. Nicole wants my building. She has a friend who flips properties, and they have been trying to lowball me since 2022. I told them no. So she started filing violations every month. Landscaping, mailboxes, roof shingles, siding color. I have spent $10,000 fighting her in court." I said, "She wrote on the notice that she would make sure every neighbor knows what I did. She is trying to force you to evict me." He said, "She is trying to make me lose tenants so the property looks vacant. Then she can claim it is blighted and push the board to force a sale. She did it to 2 other owners already." I felt my chest tighten. I said, "What can we do?" He said, "I have an attorney. I will send her everything you sent me. In the meantime, do not pay any fines, do not sign anything, and start recording every interaction. Virginia is a one-party consent state. You can record her without telling her." I said, "I already have screenshots of the notices." He said, "Good. Keep everything. And if she threatens you again, call the police. Harassment is harassment, even if she is on the HOA board." We talked for another 10 minutes. He gave me his attorney's contact information and told me to forward her all my documentation. He said he would cover any legal costs if it came to that. I thanked him and hung up. Then I opened a new document and started writing a timeline of every interaction I had had with Nicole Harwood, starting with the folding chair and ending with the lien notice. I included timestamps, direct quotes, and references to the photos I had taken. I saved it as a PDF and emailed it to Ed's attorney. By the time I finished, it was 3:30 p.m. I looked out my window and saw the plow contractor arriving. The truck was enormous, with a blade the width of the street and a salt spreader on the back. I grabbed my keys and went outside to move my truck. The plow driver waved at me and said he would start on the far end of the lot and work his way back. I moved my truck to the street and walked back to my building. Nicole Harwood was standing in the parking lot with her clipboard. She was talking to a man in a reflective vest. He had a tablet in his hands and was nodding along to whatever she was saying. I walked closer and heard her say, "That truck is parked illegally. It needs to be towed." The man looked at his tablet. He said, "The work order says we are clearing the lot. We need residents to move their vehicles to the street." She said, "That truck belongs to a tenant who is in violation of multiple covenants. He should not be allowed to park on the street. The association has a policy against commercial vehicles." I stopped walking. My truck was a standard pickup with a tool rack and a company logo on the door. It was not a semi. It was not a dump truck. It was a regular work truck, the kind you see in every neighborhood in Virginia. The man looked at me. He said, "Is that your truck?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You need to move it before we start plowing the street." Nicole said, "He is not allowed to park it here. The covenant prohibits commercial vehicles in residential areas." I turned to her. I said, "Show me the rule." She flipped through her clipboard. She said, Section 9, Subsection 2. No commercial vehicles over 3/4 ton capacity may be parked in the community overnight. I said, "My truck is a 1/2 ton. She said, "I disagree. It looks commercial to me." The plow driver walked over. He said, "I need to start in 10 minutes. If that truck is not moved, it will get plowed in." I said, "I will move it right now." Nicole said, "If you park it on the street, I will have it towed." I felt my jaw tighten. I said, "You do not have the authority to tow vehicles from a public street." She jingled her keyring. She said, "I have the tow company on speed dial. They know me. They will take care of it." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app. I hit record and held the phone at my side. I said, "Are you threatening to have my truck towed from a public street because you think it is a commercial vehicle, even though it meets the covenant specifications?" She smiled. She said, "I am just doing my job, do not blame me. If you do not move that truck to an approved location, it will be towed. And if you continue to park in violation of the covenant, I will make sure every neighbor knows what you did." I let her say my name loud, because later I wanted it on the recording. I said, "What is my name?" She said, "You are the tenant at 4217 Maple Grove Court. You are in violation of multiple covenants, and you are making this harder than it needs to be." I said, "Thank you for clarifying." I stopped the recording and saved it. Then I walked to my truck, drove it 2 blocks away, and parked it on a side street that was not part of the HOA property. I walked back and watched the plow clear the lot. Nicole was gone. I went inside, uploaded the recording to my evidence folder, and emailed it to Ed's attorney with a note that said, "She just threatened to tow my truck from a public street." The attorney responded 20 minutes later. She said, "This is harassment. I am drafting a cease and desist letter. In the meantime, do not engage with her unless absolutely necessary. If she contacts you again, refer her to me." I said, "What about the fines?" She said, "Do not pay them. The ledger is fraudulent. We will fight it." I thanked her and tried to eat dinner, but I could not focus. I kept thinking about the timeline. Nicole had escalated from a folding chair to fake guest parking violations to a bogus lien in less than 48 hours. She was not just enforcing rules, she was manufacturing violations to build a case. And she had done it before. Ed had said she pressured 2 other owners into selling. I wondered how many tenants she had driven out along the way. I spent the evening searching for more information. I found the names of the 2 owners Ed mentioned and looked them up in county property records. Both properties had sold in the last 18 months. Both had been purchased by the same LLC. I searched the LLC and found that it was registered to a man named Brian Thorne. I searched Brian Thorne and found a real estate website where he advertised himself as a fix and flip specialist. I clicked through to his portfolio and saw photos of renovated properties. One of them was in Woodland Ridge Landing. The address was on my street. I took screenshots of everything and added them to my evidence folder. Then I opened the neighborhood Facebook group and scrolled through old posts. I found a thread from 8 months earlier where someone asked if anyone knew who was buying up properties in the neighborhood. 3 people mentioned Brian Thorne. One person said he was friends with someone on the HOA board. Another person said they had been approached by him after receiving harassment from the landscaping committee. I screenshotted the entire thread and emailed it to Ed's attorney. I wrote, "Nicole Harwood is working with a property flipper to force owners to sell. She manufactures violations to pressure tenants and owners. This is fraud." The attorney responded within an hour. She said, "This is exactly what we need. I am going to file a complaint with the Virginia Common Interest Community Board. If we can prove a pattern of harassment tied to financial gain, the board can remove her from the committee and fine the association." I said, "How long will that take?" She said, "Weeks, maybe months. In the meantime, keep documenting. And be careful. If she realizes you are building a case, she will escalate." I said, "She already threatened to tow my truck." She said, "If she follows through, call the police immediately. Towing a vehicle from a public street without cause is theft." I thanked her and went to bed. I did not sleep well. I kept replaying the conversation in the parking lot. I kept hearing Nicole say, "I will make sure every neighbor knows what you did." I kept thinking about the ledger with the backdated fines. I kept wondering what she would do next. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Ed. He said, "Nicole filed a complaint with the county zoning office. They are sending an inspector today. I called my attorney. She is handling it. Do not let them inside without a warrant." I called the county zoning office and got transferred 3 times before I reached someone who could tell me what the complaint was about. The clerk said Nicole had reported unpermitted modifications to my porch, including structural changes to the railing and unauthorized fixtures. I said I was a tenant and had not made any modifications. She said the inspector would determine that. I asked when they would arrive. She said sometime between 8 a.m. and noon. I called my manager and told him I needed the morning off. He was not happy, but he approved it. I made coffee and sat on my couch, watching the parking lot through my window. At 9:15, a white county van pulled into the lot. A man in a brown jacket got out, holding a clipboard. I grabbed my phone and went outside. He introduced himself as the zoning inspector. I said, "I am the tenant. I did not make any modifications to this property." He said, "I need to verify that. Can I see the porch?" I said yes, but I want to document this. I am recording. He said that was fine. I started recording on my phone and led him to my front door. He examined the porch railing, took photos, and measured a few sections. Then he said, "This railing is original construction. There are no modifications. Who filed the complaint?" I said, "Nicole Harwood, landscaping committee lead." He made a note on his clipboard. He said, "She files a lot of complaints. Most of them are not valid. I will close this one out as unfounded." I said, "Can I get a copy of your report?" He said, "It will be in the public record in 3 business days. You can request it online." I thanked him and went inside. I emailed Ed and his attorney with an update. I said the inspector found no violations. Nicole is filing false reports with the county. The attorney responded immediately. She said, "This strengthens our case. False reports to government agencies can be prosecuted. I am adding it to the complaint." I spent the rest of the morning catching up on work. I had 3 tickets in my queue, and I finished 2 of them before lunch. I was about to leave for the 3rd when my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. I answered. A man said, "This is Dave from Precision Towing. We have your vehicle." I felt my chest tighten. I said, "What vehicle?" He said, "Silver pickup, license plate November Charlie Zulu 478. We towed it from Maple Grove Court this morning." I said, "That truck was not in the community. It was parked on a public street." He said, "We received a call from the HOA. They said it was abandoned." I said, "It was not abandoned. I parked it there yesterday afternoon." He said, "If you want it back, you need to pay the towing fee. $250, cash only." I said, "I am not paying anything. You towed my truck illegally. Put it back where you found it." He said, "That is not how it works. You can pick it up at our yard or file a dispute with the HOA." I said, "Give me the address." He gave me the address and hung up. I called Ed's attorney immediately. I explained what happened. She said, "This is theft. Call the police and file a report. Then go to the tow yard and demand the chain of custody documentation. They need to prove they had legal authority to tow your vehicle. If they cannot, the police will force them to release it." I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said an officer would meet me at the tow yard. I grabbed my wallet and my phone and started walking to the bus stop. My truck was gone, so I had no other way to get there. The bus took 45 minutes. By the time I arrived at the tow yard, it was almost 2 p.m. The yard was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. There were dozens of cars inside, all crammed together in tight rows. A small office sat near the gate with a handwritten sign that said "Cash Only." I walked inside and found a man sitting behind a desk covered in paperwork. He looked up and said, "Help you?" I said, "You towed my truck this morning. I need to see the authorization." He pulled a file from a stack and flipped it open. He said, "Woodland Ridge Landing Association called it in. Truck was parked in violation of community rules." I said, "It was parked on a public street. You do not have authority to tow vehicles from public streets." He said, "HOA says it was on their property. We do not verify. We just tow." I said, "Show me the authorization paperwork." He handed me a single sheet of paper. It was a tow request form with Nicole Harwood's name and signature at the bottom. There was no address listed. There was no description of where the truck was located. There was no reference to a covenant violation. It just said, "Unauthorized vehicle. Tow immediately." I took a photo of the form. I said, "This does not prove anything. My truck was not on HOA property." He shrugged. He said, "Take it up with the HOA. You want your truck. You pay the fee." I said, "I am not paying. A police officer is on the way. You can explain to them why you towed a vehicle without verifying the location." His expression changed. He said, "You called the cops?" I said, "Yes." He stood up and walked to the back room. I heard him talking on the phone, but I could not make out the words. A few minutes later, a police officer walked into the office. I explained the situation and showed him the photo of the tow request form. I showed him the recording I had made of Nicole threatening to tow my truck. I showed him the county property map proving the street was public. I showed him my lease and my vehicle registration. The officer looked at the tow yard owner. He said, "You towed a vehicle from a public street based on a request from a private HOA." The owner said, "We were told it was on their property." The officer said, "Did you verify that?" The owner said, "No." The officer said, "Release the vehicle immediately. No fee." The owner started to argue, but the officer cut him off. He said, "If you do not release it, I will charge you with theft. Your choice." The owner walked outside and pointed to my truck. He said, "It is over there." I followed him and checked the truck for damage. There were scratches on the front bumper from the tow hook, but everything else looked intact. I got in, started the engine, and drove out of the yard. The officer followed me to the street and stopped me. He said, "File a report with your insurance company. Document the damage. And get a restraining order against the HOA representative. This is harassment." I thanked him and drove home. I was shaking the entire way. By the time I parked in my driveway, it was almost 4 p.m. and I had missed my afternoon tickets. My manager called and asked where I was. I explained what happened. He said, "Take tomorrow off. Get this sorted out. But do not miss any more deadlines after that." I went inside and called Ed's attorney. I told her everything. She said, "This is criminal harassment. I am filing an emergency motion for a restraining order. I am also filing a complaint against the tow company with the state licensing board. And I am going to demand that the HOA remove Nicole from the committee immediately." I said, "What do I do now?" She said, "Stay away from her. Do not respond to any more notices. Do not engage. Let me handle it." I said, "What if she escalates again?" She said, "If she contacts you, call the police. If she trespasses, call the police. If she threatens you, call the police. You are the victim here, not her." I hung up and sat on my couch. I felt exhausted. I felt angry. I felt trapped. I had moved to Woodland Ridge Landing to have a quiet place to live while I worked. Instead, I was spending every spare minute fighting an HOA committee lead who was trying to force my landlord to sell. I opened my evidence folder and counted the files. I had 32 screenshots, 6 recordings, 4 emails, 2 county reports, and a police incident number. I had documentation going back 6 days, and I knew Nicole was not going to stop. That night, I could not sleep. I kept replaying the conversation at the tow yard. I kept thinking about Nicole's face when she said, "I will make sure every neighbor knows what you did." I kept wondering what she meant. I had not done anything. I had sat on my porch in a folding chair. That was the extent of my crime. And she had escalated it to fake parking violations, bogus fines, false county reports, and illegal towing. I wondered how many other people she had done this to. I wondered how many had just given up and moved. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Ed's attorney. She said, "The restraining order hearing is scheduled for next week." In the meantime, I sent a cease and desist letter to Nicole Harwood and the HOA board. I also filed a formal complaint with the Virginia Common Interest Community Board. They are opening an investigation. I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "If they find evidence of harassment or fraud, they can fine the association, remove board members, and order the HOA to pay damages. It is a slow process, but it is effective." I said, "What about the illegal towing?" She said, "I am working on that. I contacted the tow company owner and demanded the chain of custody documentation. He claims Nicole told him the truck was on HOA property. I am subpoenaing his phone records to prove she lied." I said, "Can we sue her personally?" She said, "Yes, but we need to exhaust administrative remedies first. If the state board does not act, we can file a civil suit for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." I thanked her and went to work. I spent the day catching up on tickets and trying not to think about Nicole. I finished 3 repairs, drove 200 miles, and got home at 7 p.m. There was another yellow envelope on my door. Inside was a notice scheduling a hearing with the HOA board. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday at 9 a.m. The notice said I was required to appear to answer charges of covenant violations, unauthorized guest parking, and interference with HOA operations. If I did not appear, the board would rule against me by default and assess all fines immediately. I took a photo of the notice and forwarded it to Ed's attorney. She called me 5 minutes later. She said, Do not go to that hearing. It is a trap. They are trying to get you on record admitting to violations. I will send a letter stating that you are represented by counsel and that all communication should go through me. I said, what if they rule against me anyway? She said, let them. Any ruling they make without due process is invalid. We will challenge it in court. I said, this is insane. She said, this is what happens when an HOA is run by people with no oversight. Nicole has been doing this for years, and no one has stopped her, but we are going to stop her now. I hung up and tried to eat dinner. I could not focus. I kept thinking about the hearing. I kept thinking about the timeline. Nicole had filed the bogus lien on Monday. She had threatened to tow my truck on Tuesday. She had followed through on Wednesday. And now she was demanding I appear at a hearing on the following Tuesday. She was moving fast. She was escalating. And I did not know what she would do next. On Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee and checking my email when I heard a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a gray suit. I opened the door and he handed me a large envelope. He said, "You have been served." He walked away before I could respond. Inside the envelope was a lawsuit. The Woodland Ridge Landing Association was suing me for $3,000 in unpaid fines, plus attorney fees and court costs. The complaint listed 6 violations: unauthorized outdoor furniture, unauthorized guest parking, commercial vehicle parking, interference with HOA operations, failure to comply with landscaping standards, and harassment of committee members. Every single charge was false. I took photos of every page and emailed them to Ed's attorney. She called me 10 minutes later. She said, "They are trying to bury you in legal fees. This is a slap suit. It is designed to intimidate you into giving up." I said, "What do we do?" She said, "We file a motion to dismiss, and we countersue for malicious prosecution, abuse of process, and harassment. This is going to get expensive for them." I said, "How much is this going to cost me?" She said, "Ed is covering your legal fees. Do not worry about that. Just focus on documenting everything and staying safe." I thanked her and hung up. I spent the rest of the day trying to process what was happening. Nicole had gone from threatening to tow my truck to filing a lawsuit in less than a week. She was not just trying to pressure my landlord into selling, she was trying to destroy me personally. And she was using the HOA as a weapon. On Sunday, I went for a walk to clear my head. I walked past the community center and saw a flyer on the bulletin board. It advertised a special board meeting scheduled for Monday at 7 p.m. The agenda included a vote on a proposal to amend the covenant enforcement procedures. I took a photo of the flyer and sent it to Ed's attorney. She said, "Go to that meeting. Bring your evidence. If they try to change the rules to cover up what Nicole did, we need it on record." Monday evening, I walked to the community center and found the meeting room. There were about 30 people there, most of them older residents. Nicole was sitting at a table in the front with 4 other board members. She saw me, and her expression hardened. I sat in the back row and opened the voice recorder app on my phone. The board president called the meeting to order and started reading through the agenda. The first item was a proposal to amend the covenant enforcement procedures to give committee leads more discretion in issuing fines. The second item was a proposal to increase the daily fine cap from $50 to $200. The third item was a proposal to authorize the association to hire a private security firm to enforce parking rules. I listened as the board members discussed the proposals. Most of them supported the changes. One board member, a man named Tom, raised his hand and said, "I think we need to slow down. We have had multiple complaints about overzealous enforcement. We should be tightening oversight, not loosening it." Nicole stood up. She said, "We have residents who refuse to comply with the rules. We need stronger tools to enforce the covenant. If we do not act, the neighborhood will decline." Tom said, "We also have residents who are being harassed. I have received emails from 3 different owners in the last month. They all mention the same committee lead." Nicole said, "Those complaints are from people who do not want to follow the rules. I am just doing my job, do not blame me." Tom said, "I am not blaming you. I am saying we need oversight. We need a process. We cannot have committee leads filing violations without board approval. Nicole jingled her keyring. She said, "If you tie my hands, I cannot do my job. And if I cannot do my job, this neighborhood will turn into a slum." Another board member, a woman named Janet, said, "I agree with Tom. We need to review the enforcement procedures. I propose we table these amendments and form a subcommittee to investigate recent complaints." The board president said, "All in favor." 3 board members raised their hands, including Tom and Janet. Nicole did not raise her hand. The president said, "Motion passes. We will table the amendments and form a subcommittee. Nicole, you are recused from the subcommittee due to conflict of interest." Nicole stood up. She said, "This is ridiculous. You are letting a few troublemakers control the board. I will not stand for this." The president said, "You are out of order. Sit down." Nicole grabbed her clipboard and her keyring and walked out of the room. I stayed for the rest of the meeting, which lasted another 20 minutes. When it ended, I walked up to Tom and introduced myself. I said, "I am the tenant Nicole has been targeting. I have documentation of everything she has done." He said, "I know who you are. I have seen the emails. I am sorry this happened. The board should have acted sooner." I said, "Can I send you my evidence?" He said, "Yes. Send it to me tonight. I am meeting with the subcommittee tomorrow, and I want to include it in the review." I thanked him and went home. I spent the next hour compiling my evidence into a single PDF. I included the photos of the violation notices, the recordings of Nicole threatening me, the bogus ledger, the screenshots of the neighborhood Facebook posts, the county inspector's report, the police incident report from the tow yard, the lawsuit, and the timeline I had written. I emailed it to Tom with a note that said, "This is everything. Please let me know if you need anything else." He responded within 10 minutes. He said, "This is damning. I am forwarding it to the subcommittee tonight. We will have a meeting tomorrow afternoon. Can you attend?" I said, "Yes." The next day, I took a half-day off work and drove to the community center. The subcommittee meeting was in a small conference room. Tom was there, along with Janet and another board member named Steve. I sat down and Tom said, "We reviewed your evidence. This is worse than we thought. Nicole has been filing false reports, backdating fines, and coordinating with a property flipper to pressure owners into selling. We are recommending that the board remove her from all committees immediately." Janet said, "We are also recommending that the association hire an independent auditor to review all fines issued in the last 3 years. If we find other fraudulent charges, we will refund them." Steve said, "We are going to refer this to the Virginia Common Interest Community Board and the county prosecutor. What Nicole did is not just unethical, it is criminal." I said, "What about the lawsuit?" Tom said, "The board is going to vote tonight to withdraw the lawsuit and drop all fines against you. We will also issue a formal apology." I said, "What about Nicole?" Tom said, "She will be removed from the committee. If she tries to file any more violations, they will be rejected automatically. And if she retaliates, we will pursue a restraining order on behalf of the association." I thanked them and left. I felt lighter than I had in days. I went back to work and finished my afternoon tickets. That evening, I got an email from Ed's attorney. She said, "The board voted unanimously to remove Nicole from all committees and drop the lawsuit. They are also issuing a formal censure. You won." I said, "What happens now?" She said, "We wait for the state board investigation. If they find evidence of fraud, Nicole could face criminal charges. In the meantime, you are free to live your life without harassment." I said, "What about the property flipper?" She said, "The board is investigating that too. If they find evidence that Nicole was coordinating with Brian Thorne, they will refer it to the county prosecutor. Real estate fraud is a serious crime in Virginia." I thanked her and hung up. That night, I sat on my couch and opened my evidence folder. I had 48 files now. I scrolled through them, reading the notes I had written. I thought about the moment in the parking lot when Nicole had threatened to tow my truck. I thought about the moment at the tow yard when I had shown the police officer the recording. I thought about the moment at the board meeting when Tom had proposed forming a subcommittee. Every one of those moments had felt like a small victory, but the biggest victory was still to come. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Ed's attorney. She said the state board finished their investigation. They found evidence that Nicole violated multiple sections of the Virginia Common Interest Community Act. They are fining the association $20,000 and ordering them to implement new oversight procedures. They are also recommending that the county prosecutor file charges against Nicole for filing false reports with the zoning office. I said, "What kind of charges?" She said, "Misdemeanor fraud. It carries up to a year in jail and a $5,000 fine. But the bigger issue is the property flipper. The prosecutor is investigating Brian Thorne for real estate fraud. If they can prove he coordinated with Nicole to pressure owners into selling, he could face felony charges." I said, "How did they connect him?" She said, "The subpoena I filed for the tow company phone records came back. Nicole called Brian Thorne 3 times the day before she filed the lien notice. The prosecutor subpoenaed his phone records and found text messages discussing the properties he wanted to buy. One of them was your building." I felt my chest tighten. I said, "So she was working with him the whole time?" She said, "Yes, and the state board is going to use that evidence to refer the case to the Virginia Attorney General. If the AG picks it up, this could turn into a statewide investigation." I said, "What does that mean for me?" She said, "You are done. You are safe. Nicole cannot touch you. The board has issued a permanent ban on her filing any violations in the community. If she tries, they will call the police." I thanked her and hung up. I sat on my couch and stared at my phone. I had spent 3 weeks documenting every interaction, every threat, every false report. I had spent hundreds of hours compiling evidence, talking to attorneys, and filing complaints. And it had worked. Nicole was done. The board had removed her. The state was investigating her. And I was free. But there was one more thing I needed to do. I had been holding on to a piece of evidence since the beginning, and I had not used it yet. I had not told anyone about it. I had been waiting for the right moment. And that moment had finally arrived. 3 days after the state board issued their report, I got a call from the county prosecutor. She said, "We are moving forward with charges against Nicole Harwood. We need you to testify at a preliminary hearing next month. Can you do that?" I said, "Yes." She said, "We have the phone records and the text messages, but we need something that ties Nicole directly to the towing incident. Do you have anything?" I said, "I have a recording of her threatening to tow my truck, but I have something better." She said, "What?" I said, "I have a neighbor's doorbell video showing her trespassing on my property the night before the tow. She was measuring my truck to see if it would fit the commercial vehicle definition in the covenant. She was planning the tow in advance." The prosecutor went silent. Then she said, "Send me that video immediately." I said, "I will send it tonight, but I want to use it for something else first." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "The tow company is still in business. They are still working with HOAs. I want to show the owner the video and make him cut ties with Nicole. If he does not, I will make sure every HOA in Virginia knows he tows vehicles based on false reports." She said, "That is not illegal, but it is risky. If Nicole finds out, she could retaliate." I said, "She already lost her committee position. She already has criminal charges pending. She has nothing left to lose. But the tow company does. If I show the owner proof that Nicole lied to him, he will drop her immediately." The prosecutor said, "Be careful, and send me the video by tomorrow morning." I said, "I will." I hung up and opened my evidence folder. The doorbell video was from my next-door neighbor, an older man named Frank. He had given it to me the day after the tow. He said his camera had caught Nicole walking up my driveway at 11 p.m. the night before. She had stood next to my truck for 3 minutes, taking photos and measurements. Then she had walked back to her car and driven away. Frank said he had not thought anything of it at the time, but after I told him what happened, he realized she was planning the tow. I had saved the video, but I had not shown it to anyone. I had been waiting for the right moment, and now that moment had arrived. I emailed the video to the county prosecutor with a note that said, "This proves Nicole planned the illegal tow in advance. She trespassed on my property at night to gather evidence for a fake violation." Then I drove to the tow yard. It was after hours, but I knew the owner would be there. He lived in a trailer behind the office. I parked on the street and walked to the gate. The office lights were off, but I saw a light in the trailer window. I knocked on the door. The owner answered. He recognized me immediately. He said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want to show you something." I pulled out my phone and played the doorbell video. I showed him Nicole trespassing on my property, measuring my truck, taking photos. I showed him the timestamp proving it was the night before the tow. I showed him the text messages the prosecutor had subpoenaed proving Nicole coordinated with Brian Thorne. I showed him everything. When the video ended, I said, "Nicole lied to you. She told you my truck was on HOA property. It was not. She told you it was a commercial vehicle. It was not. She used your company to commit theft, and now you are being investigated by the county prosecutor. If you do not cut ties with her immediately, I will make sure every HOA in Virginia knows you tow vehicles based on false reports." He stared at me. Then he said, "I did not know." I said, "You should have verified. Now you are going to fix it." He said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want you to send a letter to the prosecutor stating that Nicole lied to you. I want you to refund every towing fee you charged based on her requests, and I want you to blacklist her. No more tows. No more calls. Nothing." He said, "If I do that, she will sue me." I said, "She is already facing criminal charges. She has no money for a lawsuit, and if you do not do it, the prosecutor will charge you as an accessory to fraud." He thought about it for a long moment. Then he said, "Fine. I will send the letter tomorrow." I said, "Good. And one more thing. I want the name of every HOA Nicole has worked with in the last 3 years. I am going to contact them and let them know what she did." He said, "I am not giving you that." I said, "Then I will get it from the prosecutor. She already subpoenaed your records. You might as well cooperate now." He cursed under his breath. Then he said, "Wait here." He went inside and came back with a printed list. It had 12 HOA names on it. I took a photo of the list and thanked him. Then I drove home. The next morning, I sent the list to Ed's attorney. She said, "This is gold. I am going to contact every HOA on this list and let them know they may have been victims of fraud. If any of them want to file complaints, it will strengthen the state board investigation." I said, "What about Brian Thorne?" She said, "The prosecutor is closing in on him. They have enough evidence to file charges. It is just a matter of time." I thanked her and went to work. I spent the day finishing tickets and trying not to think about Nicole. I knew she was done. I knew the board had removed her. I knew the prosecutor was building a case. But I still felt uneasy. I kept thinking about the line she had written on the first violation notice. "I will make sure every neighbor knows what you did." I kept wondering if she would try one last time to retaliate. 2 weeks later, I got my answer. I came home from work and found a small envelope taped to my door. Inside was a handwritten note. It said, "You think you won. You did not. I will see you at the code enforcement counter. Nicole." I took a photo of the note and called Ed's attorney. She said, "This is a direct threat. Call the police and file a harassment report. And do not go to the code enforcement office alone. I will meet you there tomorrow." I called the police and filed the report. The officer said they would increase patrols in my neighborhood. I thanked him and tried to sleep, but I could not. I kept thinking about the note. I kept thinking about the code enforcement counter. I kept wondering what Nicole was planning. The next morning, I drove to the county government building and met Ed's attorney in the lobby. She said, "Stay calm. Do not engage with her. Let me do the talking." We walked to the code enforcement office and found Nicole waiting near the counter. She was holding a folder and her key ring. She saw me and smiled. She said, "I filed a complaint. They are going to inspect your property again. And this time, they are going to find violations." The attorney stepped between us. She said, "Miss Harwood, you are not allowed to contact my client. You are under investigation by the state board, the county prosecutor, and the police. Any further contact will be considered harassment." Nicole jingled her keyring. She said, "I am not contacting him. I am filing a legitimate complaint. The Code Enforcement Office is a public agency. I have every right to use it." The attorney said, "You have no right to file false reports, and if you do, I will add it to the criminal complaint." A clerk called Nicole's name. She walked to the counter and handed over her folder. The clerk opened it and started reading. Then she looked up and said, "Miss Harwood, we have a note on your account. You are flagged for filing multiple unfounded complaints. We cannot accept any more reports from you without supervisory approval." Nicole's expression changed. She said, "What are you talking about?" The clerk said, "Your complaint history shows a pattern of false reports. The supervisor reviewed your account last week and placed a hold. If you want to file a new complaint, you need to speak to the supervisor first." Nicole said, "I demand to speak to the supervisor." The clerk said, "He is not available. You can make an appointment for next week." Nicole grabbed her folder and walked out of the office. The attorney turned to me and said, "That is it, she is done. The county flagged her account. She cannot file any more complaints without approval, and the approval process will catch any false reports before they go through." I said, "What about the note?" She said, "I am adding it to the harassment complaint. The police are already investigating. If she contacts you again, they will arrest her." I thanked her and left. I drove to my first job site and tried to focus on work. I finished 3 tickets and got home at 6 p.m. There was no envelope on my door. There were no new emails. There were no calls. For the first time in a month, I felt like I could breathe. The following week, I got a call from the county prosecutor. She said, "We are filing criminal charges against Nicole Harwood for filing false reports, harassment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. We are also filing charges against Brian Thorne for real estate fraud. The grand jury will hear the case next month." I said, "What do you need from me?" She said, "We need you to testify. We need you to walk the jury through the timeline. We need you to explain how Nicole targeted you and how Brian Thorne was involved." I said, "I can do that." She said, "Good. We will send you a subpoena. In the meantime, do not contact Nicole. Do not respond to any messages. Let us handle it." I said, "What about the HOA?" She said, "The state board is working with the association to implement new oversight procedures. They are also auditing all fines issued in the last 3 years. If they find other fraudulent charges, they will refund them." I thanked her and hung up. 2 days later, I got a call from Tom, the board member who had formed the subcommittee. He said, "The board voted last night to issue a formal censure against Nicole Harwood. We are also banning her from all committee positions for life. If she tries to run for the board in the future, she will be disqualified." I said, "What about the other owners?" He said, "We contacted everyone who received fines from Nicole in the last 3 years. We are refunding over $50,000 in fraudulent charges. We are also implementing a new appeals process so this never happens again." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Thank you. You did the right thing. You stood up to her when no one else would. You saved this neighborhood." I hung up and sat on my couch. I felt exhausted. I felt relieved. I felt vindicated. I had spent a month fighting Nicole, and I had won. The board had removed her. The state had investigated her. The prosecutor was filing criminal charges, and I was free. But I knew the fight was not over. I knew Nicole would face charges. I knew Brian Thorne would face charges. I knew the grand jury would hear the case, and I knew I would have to testify. I opened my evidence folder and started reviewing the files. I had 53 documents now. I had photos, recordings, emails, reports, and timelines. I had everything I needed to prove what Nicole had done. And I was ready. A month later, I sat in a courtroom and watched Nicole Harwood stand in front of a judge. She was wearing a dark suit, and her hair was pulled back. She did not look at me. The prosecutor read the charges, filing false reports, harassment, conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge asked how she pleaded. She said, "Not guilty." The prosecutor said, "Your Honor, we have extensive evidence. We have recordings, doorbell video, phone records, text messages, and witness testimony. We have proof that Miss Harwood coordinated with a property flipper to pressure homeowners into selling. We have proof that she filed false reports with the county. We have proof that she harassed tenants and owners. We request that she be held on bail pending trial." The judge said, "Bail is set at $10,000. Trial is scheduled for 3 months from today." Nicole posted bail and walked out of the courtroom. I stayed for the hearing on Brian Thorne. He was charged with real estate fraud, conspiracy, and filing false documents. He pleaded not guilty. The judge set his bail at $50,000 and scheduled his trial for 4 months out. I left the courthouse and called Ed's attorney. She said, "We are almost done. The criminal cases will take a few months, but the civil case is settled. The HOA agreed to pay you $15,000 in damages for the harassment, the illegal tow, and the fraudulent lawsuit. They also agreed to cover all your legal fees." I said, "What about Nicole and Brian?" She said, "If they are convicted, you can sue them personally for additional damages. But we will wait until the criminal trials are over." I thanked her and went home. I sat on my couch and looked around my living room. I thought about the folding chair on my porch. I thought about the first violation notice. I thought about the moment Nicole had said, "I will make sure every neighbor knows what you did." I thought about the moment I had let her say my name loud, because later I wanted it on the recording. I thought about the moment at the tow yard when I had shown the police officer the evidence. I thought about the moment at the code enforcement counter when the clerk had told Nicole her account was flagged. I thought about the moment I had shown the tow company owner the doorbell video. Every one of those moments had been a turning point. Every one of those moments had changed the story. And every one of those moments had been possible because I had documented everything. I had kept records. I had taken photos. I had recorded conversations. I had built a case. And I had won. 3 months later, I sat in the courtroom again and watched Nicole Harwood get convicted on all charges. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. The judge sentenced her to 6 months in jail, suspended to probation, plus 5 years of community service and a $10,000 fine. She was also ordered to pay restitution to every homeowner who had been charged fraudulent fines. The total restitution was over $60,000. Brian Thorne was convicted a month later. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison for real estate fraud. He was also ordered to pay restitution to the owners whose properties he had tried to acquire through harassment. The Woodland Ridge Landing Association implemented new oversight procedures. They hired an independent management company to review all covenant enforcement actions. They created an appeals process that allowed residents to challenge violations before fines were assessed. They banned committee leads from issuing fines without board approval. And they removed Nicole Harwood from all community records. I stayed in my unit for another year. I never saw Nicole again. I never received another violation notice. I never had another problem with the HOA. And I never forgot the lesson I learned: document everything, stay calm, and never let someone use the rules as a weapon. When I finally moved out, I left the neighborhood quietly. I packed my truck, said goodbye to Frank, and drove away. I never looked back. But I kept the evidence folder. I kept the recordings. I kept the screenshots. I kept the timeline. And I kept the doorbell video. Because someday, someone else might need it. Someday, someone else might be sitting on their porch in a folding chair, and someone like Nicole might walk up with a clipboard and a key ring. And when that happens, I want them to know that they can fight back. They can document everything. They can build a case. They can win. I learned that the HOA was not the enemy. The rules were not the enemy. The enemy was people who used the rules as a weapon. The enemy was people who twisted the language of covenants to serve their own interests. The enemy was people who saw neighbors as obstacles instead of people. And the only way to stop them was to shine a light on what they were doing, to record it, to document it, to prove it, and to never give up. The day I moved out, I drove past the community center one last time. I saw the sign for Woodland Ridge Landing Association. I saw the manicured lawns and the matching mailboxes and the narrow streets. I saw the neighborhood that had been a battlefield for a month. And I saw it for what it really was, just a place. Just houses and streets and rules. The people made it what it was, and the people could change it. I thought about Nicole sitting in her probation meetings. I thought about Brian Thorne in prison. I thought about the 50 homeowners who got their money back. I thought about Tom and Janet and Steve, the board members who had listened and acted. I thought about Ed, my landlord, who had paid for my legal defense without asking for anything in return. I thought about Frank, who had given me the doorbell video that changed everything. And I thought about Ed's attorney, who had fought for me when I did not know how to fight for myself. I thought about the moment Nicole had said, "I will make sure every neighbor knows what you did," and I realized she had been right. Every neighbor did know what I did. They knew I stood up to her. They knew I documented everything. They knew I fought back. And because of that, she could never do it to anyone else. I drove out of Woodland Ridge Landing and merged onto the highway. I had a new apartment waiting for me in a building with no HOA. I had a clean slate. I had my evidence folder. And I had a story that I would never forget. A story about a folding chair, a clipboard, a key ring, and the moment when I decided to fight back. A story about a neighborhood that almost broke me and the people who helped me win. A story about standing up to someone who thought they were untouchable and proving them wrong. I never saw Nicole Harwood again, but I heard she moved out of Woodland Ridge Landing 6 months after her conviction. I heard she sold her house at a loss. I heard she left Virginia entirely. And I heard that no HOA in the state would hire her after the Virginia Common Interest Community Board published their report. I kept working as a regional field technician. I kept driving between job sites. I kept troubleshooting equipment that should have been replaced years ago. But I never forgot what I learned in that neighborhood. I never forgot that rules are only as fair as the people who enforce them. I never forgot that documentation is power. And I never forgot that sometimes the only way to win is to stand your ground and refuse to be intimidated. Years later, I still get emails from people who lived in Woodland Ridge Landing. They thank me for standing up to Nicole. They tell me stories about how the neighborhood changed after she left. They tell me the new management company is fair. They tell me the board listens to residents now. They tell me the neighborhood is a better place. And every time I get one of those emails, I think about the folding chair on my porch and the moment I decided not to give up. That is the story. That is what happened when an HOA landscaping committee lead tried to destroy my life over a folding chair, and I had the perfect proof to stop her. That is what happened when I documented everything, built a case, and fought back. And that is what happens when you refuse to let someone use the rules as a weapon. You win. You prove them wrong. And you make sure they can never do it to anyone else.